What's going on, guys? We are back, just fresh off of watching that Bills-Eagles overtime game. Jalen Hurts just rushed it in to win the game in overtime after the Bills kicked a field goal. Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, fantasy bonanza in this game, dude. Like I was looking forward to this game, but it kind of surpassed my expectations. And I know you're a Cowboys fan, Zach, and this was not the outcome that you were hoping for. But, as a football fan, you have to admit this was a pretty good game.
What do you think? You think because I'm a Cowboys fan, I'm gonna say that wasn't a good game? No.
Yeah.
My fandom goes very far, but not that far. I can be objective, believe it or not. I know a lot of people probably don't believe it because I do find ways to interject the Cowboys into everything we talk about here. But I'm not going to talk about them here right now. This was a freaking awesome game. And you look at the games that the quarterbacks had: 40 points for Josh Allen, 35 points for Jalen Hurts. You'd think there would be more for the other players, like the weapons, but DeVonta Smith led the Eagles receivers like just 23 points. Gabe Davis had 20-some points. Like, it was very even. There wasn't anybody that really dominated outside of the two quarterbacks, but that's because they were both running the ball in. Like, the thing that's even more impressive to me about these two performances is, did you see the weather in the game?
Yeah.
Like, I know it affects kicks and stuff, but when you have the weather that they were playing in, you have 5 total touchdowns from Jalen Hurts. You have 4 total touchdowns from Josh Allen. Like, you just got to give him props for that. It was ridiculous. Now, will I complain about a couple of the calls in the game? Yeah, but that's just a usual thing for the refs. It has nothing to do with fantasy football. Both of them had great days. The quarterbacks. That's all you can ask for at this point. But you'd think the other thing that was surprising me is that the running backs were very quiet given the weather. They kind of defied that whole idea that, the weather's going to be bad, we're going to be handing the ball off a lot. They threw the ball a bunch in this game. I mean, Josh Allen had 51 attempts. So that's exactly what you see. And this
I think
great. Yeah.
This is a good example of why, like, you don't really want to change, your lineups and stuff like that based on rain. Like, if it's a super windy game, then yeah, sure, right? But there wasn't that much wind in this game, and that field goal, what was it, 59 yards?
59. Yeah, it was 59.
Insane in those conditions, even though there wasn't rain. But because there was not too much wind, he was still able to get it through. But this is a good example of why we should focus on wind and not necessarily rain when we're making our fantasy decisions.
Yeah, like with that kick, I'll give him props for that. Like, I don't care if there was no wind. I would be the guy, like, if I were the kicker in that situation, I would definitely miss on my planting foot and just slide and like Charlie Brown. You know what I mean? Just completely whiff on the ball. The holder wouldn't even have to move the ball. I would just slide. So, like, I'm going to give him credit for that one. You can't take away what either of these teams did. It's just dumb. The only thing you say is that the Eagles were just better. And I hate to say it, but the Eagles are fantastic. It looks like Jalen Hurts, it looked bad through the first half. What did Jalen Hurts have? Did he have like 6 fantasy points?
Something like that.
I think he had a rushing touchdown. He was 2 of 9 for like 33 yards. Like, it was ridiculous. And now he comes back and throws 3 touchdowns in the second half. Like, just Jalen Hurts is fantasy proof. He is pretty much the QB1 at this point because it doesn't matter how the game's going. He can you just flip a switch. It's amazing.
It really is, man. He really flipped that switch, towards the end of that game. And it was like, it's almost like, it's no problem for him. Like, he knows what to do, like, in these situations in the fourth quarter and overtime. It was too easy, man. It really was. Like, and
situational football, like, he's not only good for the team, but for fantasy.
Oh, yeah. 1,000%, man. And, Devonte Smith, man, he's scored a touchdown in 3 of his last 4 games, 99 or more yards in 3 of his last 4 games. Couldn't get those 100-yard games, but 99 or more yards.
That is another.
Yeah, I know, right? He was, if he scored, like last week, he got stopped at the 1-yard line, on a long bomb from Jalen Hurts. If he scored that touchdown, it would have been more fantasy points for him, right? It was a missed opportunity for him to score yet another touchdown. And, obviously, he would have had that 100-yard game. But, anyway.
Yeah.
So,
game of inches.
Yeah. It's a game of inches, man. And, next week, another good matchup against San Francisco, I think, right? And, we're kind of looking like this is one of those things where, A.J. Brown, obviously, he went on that tear. But teams are just focusing on him now, right? They kind of have to, right? They just can't let A.J. Brown just, like, go off every single game, right? And it's come to the point now where Devontae has more than doubled A.J. Brown's receiving yards over the last 3 games. So, I hope you bought Devontae, when I talked about it a few weeks ago when Goddard got hurt. Because yes, like he has a decent matchup. I think against San Francisco, that secondary can be had, and I think this offense can do that. But then two tough matchups after that. But then in weeks 16 and 17 in your fantasy playoffs, Giants and Cardinals to potentially close out your fantasy season. Hopefully, you can win a championship with DeVonta Smith on your team. But yeah, like I think obviously AJ Brown's been disappointing. He scored a touchdown this game, which was good. But don't worry, just keep starting him. There's no real decisions to be made here, but I think both him and DeVonta Smith, should be in lineups moving forward for sure.
Absolutely. There's no question about it. And the nice thing, I'm not worried about AJ Brown at all. Like he's on a level where I'm not concerned, especially even if it's 2 games. He's had 2 quiet games, but he had the touchdown. This game was great. Good. Now you really don't have to worry about it. But was anybody really panicking after last week against the Chiefs? First of all, that was objectively a tough matchup. We know that the Chiefs are good on defense. They're good at limiting production in a receiving game. And he had a quiet game. That was his first actual dud performance outside of week 2 against the Vikings, but that was just a positive game script. It was just weird to see AJ Brown in a situation, a competitive game where he didn't get the targets. And now happens again this week. Competitive game. He gets some of the targets, not necessarily as many as we're used to seeing him get, but he had the touchdown. There's nothing to worry about with him. But Devonta Smith, too, like you mentioned, he looks like the old Devonta Smith that we were seeing from last season, where he wasn't just phased out of the offense. And I'm not gonna fault the Eagles. Obviously, if you have a guy like AJ Brown on tear like he was earlier in the season, are you really gonna stop throwing to him? Right. I'm not gonna fault them for that. But Devonta Smith, he is a very good receiver. This kind of regression was due. He was due for this type of regression because we've seen the way he produces. He was super quiet these past couple of weeks. It was easy to get down on him. I was down on him, but he's back. The Eagles seem to have found their stride on offense. They don't look as awkward on offense, these past couple of weeks as they did earlier in the season. They were still figuring out what they were doing. So that's also really encouraging. And then you look at the matchups too. I don't think there's really a better schedule, the rest of the way in terms of how the weeks that they're going to have those good matchups for you. Next week, obviously, if you're looking to make a playoff push against 49ers, should be perfectly fine. We've seen teams go off against them, their secondary. But then you mentioned, like you said, the Giants and the Cardinals in the championship rounds. Obviously, week 18 doesn't count for anything, but you got the Giants, super squishy back half of the schedule that you're going to be able to rely on them every single week the rest of the way.
Yeah. And on the other side of the ball, you and I were both ahead of consensus on Gabe Davis, 5 for 92 in a touchdown. Actually, did he go over 100 yards in this game? Because
Gabe Davis had 105. Yep. 6 for 12, 105, and a touchdown.
Legit.
The game continues.
Listen, he led the team in targets with how many targets did he have? 11 in this one?
He had 12.
12 targets.
Gabe Davis had 12, yeah.
This is not indicative of anything, moving forward, except that he's just adding to the resume that he's already had, that he's capable of performing in good matchups like this one. Stephon Diggs also coming back as well, having a solid game, finding the end zone. But this doesn't mean that you could continue to start Gabe Davis moving forward or anything like that. But you pick your spots, and this was one of those spots that we recommended this week. So hopefully, if you had him, hopefully he was able to help you get a win. Let's move on. We had a few disappointing performances. One being Adam Thielen. What happened to Adam Thielen, dude? What happened there? What possible explanation, can we possibly have in this one?
I think the possible explanation for me personally is we're finally seeing Bryce Young just get smushed every single play. The offense, the wheels have completely fallen off of the Panthers offense. It's not working anymore where Adam Thielen can be the sole, way to produce in this offense. As surprising as it was to see Thielen only catch 1 pass, I think it was more surprising that he only had 3 targets in this game, considering that he was the target guy. He was leading the team in targets every single week, pretty much the entire season. The production for Thielen, it had fallen off a little bit after the bye compared to what it was before the bye, but the utilization was still there at least these past few weeks. He had double-digit targets in 3 or 4 games since week 8. But Bryce Young wasn't even looking his way today. And maybe that had to do with him being under extreme pressure all game again. This is just a trend. It's really difficult for a quarterback to produce, especially a rookie that's undersized. I don't want to make that the narrative here, but, Bryce Young, he's struggled, this season under pressure. Thielen bottomed out. He hasn't scored more than 16 PPR points since before the bye. So it might be time that Thielen starts moving down my ranks a little bit. He was able to overcome the bad offense to begin the season, but it seems like the lack of continuity of play caller has seriously damaged Thielen's ability to produce. I think that might be affecting things a little bit more than we originally thought it would. Thielen was overcoming a bad offense, but at least there's continuity of play caller. They've been throwing that job around between Frank Reich, and I forget the guy's name. Was it Thomas Brown, something like that? I'm not sure. But the other guy that they were getting to call the
Thomas
plays in Carolina, they've been tossing that around a little bit. That's not good for a rookie quarterback objectively, and certainly not going to help anybody in fantasy football. I'm definitely going to be moving him down the rankings for sure, personally, these next couple weeks. But there's still that target upside. It's 1 week where it's just like, whoa, what happened? I'm not panicking, but I am going to acknowledge that he hasn't been the same receiver these past few weeks that he was in terms of production earlier in the season.
Yeah, I hear that. I mean, what it seems like is that Vrabel, was his game plan was to take Thielen out of this game, right? So it seemed like there was a lot of bracket coverage. I haven't watched the all 22 yet, but the couple plays that I did see that there was some bracket coverage on him, making it a point to take him away. He was solid against the Cowboys, last week in a tough matchup. And if I'm looking ahead, Tampa Bay, one of those matchups where we talked about, a good matchup out of the slot, right? So, I'm not going to be moving away from Adam Thielen next week, personally. He's still going to probably be up there, potentially in my top 12. There's a bunch of teams on bye next week, so I think for me personally, Adam Thielen's going to be in my lineup. I just think that
maybe.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe I got a little bit too comfortable because I forgot there were no buys this week.
There were no buys.
Either way, it was a really nice, break from having to worry about a player being on bye. You forget that you have buys this late. There shouldn't be buys 2 weeks or a week out from fantasy playoffs.
Yeah,
that's one of my gripes.
It's not
this
nice.
Is ridiculous.
By the way, if you needed this deep play in your league, and you remember me saying Jonathan Mingo as the deepest desperate start you can make on Friday's show, you got yourself 10 PPR fantasy points. You're welcome. Okay.
Yeah, Faraz just spotted you those. Nothing else to really say about it because he hadn't done anything this whole season.
Oh man!
And he came through this week.
Too funny. Rhamondre Stevenson. Here we go, baby. Okay. The production was great. 21 fantasy points, but 2 straight games with 20 plus carries. And we talked about Rhamondre having one of his best games in terms of utilization the week before their bye. And they came out of the bye with him getting an even bigger bump in utilization. 59% of the rushing attempts before the bye to 70% of the rushing attempts on Sunday. On top of that, at least 5 targets in 5 of his last 6 games. The route participation also jumping up to 68% the week before the bye. That stayed constant on Sunday. And the best of all, 78% of snaps on Sunday. Okay, this is the highest it's been all season long. Zeke was only on the field for 15 snaps in this game. If this continues, Rhamondre is now matchup proof. He's game script independent, but and he also has some good matchups coming up either way, right? So wheels up for Rhamondre Stevenson moving forward.
Yeah, that has to be the case. And this is just a product of the Patriots offense being total garbage. To anyone who doesn't think that Rhamondre can be matchup proof, did you watch the game today?
I know.
I thought it was Saturday again. I thought this was
So
Big
bad.
12. I know they just had I don't know if you saw Iowa. They had that over under. It was set at 25. It was a record low for over under total in a game, and they hit the under 2 points under it. It was just ridiculous. That's what it felt like watching this game. It was so bad. And I forget a couple weeks ago, it might have been. It's probably Ian Hart. It's because he puts out hilarious stuff all the time. But I saw a post. It's this Giants-Patriots game is going to set back offense 5 years. That's what happened. It was horrific. Now, Tommy DeVito looked pretty good. I'll give you that. He had some nice passes, but it was just a terrible game on offense. The Patriots had no choice other than to make their best offensive player the focal point of their offense. That's Rhamondre, because they're pretty much playing without a quarterback the rest of the way. I can't believe the way that Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi, they're literally carbon copies of each other. That should help Rhamondre's fantasy managers sleep well at night, knowing that there isn't going to be a game where, Rhamondre doesn't get 5 or 6 checkdowns a game, because that's what these quarterbacks are capable of at this point. There's not a whole lot of ceiling to chase here with Stevenson. I'm not going out here and saying that he's going to continue to have 21 points. If this usage happens, if it keeps moving, and this is what we see moving forward, then that could be in the cards. But this is the first time that we saw this. I don't want to get too attached to it because this is what we want to see. But as we know, these things can change overnight really quickly. But he does have those good matchups on tap these next few weeks. He could offset any workload issues with touchdowns the rest of the way. Not that this offense is that great, but it seems like if the Patriots are scoring, it's going to be through Rhamondre.
I'm not banking on any touchdowns the rest of the way for Rhamondre Stevenson.
You're done? There's no more touchdowns?
What I am banking on is that before the bye, the utilization increased to a point where my interest was very, it piqued my interest, okay? And now, after the bye, the utilization moving up to where it was today, I'm just like, okay, all right, here we go. Because now, he's going to have that high floor. And that's all I'm asking for. The floor that we saw last year with those targets, and then, him being somewhat efficient well, not somewhat efficient. He was one of the most efficient runners in the NFL last year too. So I'm interested, even if this offense is shit. And by the way, Mac Jones was benched after a few turnovers for Bailey Zappi. Not that it really matters because, like I said, the offense is not good. Okay, moving on. Chris Olave went 7 for 114 yards in the first half. Personally, like, I found the whole, Derek Carr is playing, should I play Chris Olave questions? I found them kind of hilarious, personally, okay? Like, the dude had a 27% target share coming into this game, okay? And Derek Carr was their quarterback pretty much all season long. So, Derek Carr was getting him the ball. Like, things didn't quite line up all the time. There were, these little quirks here and there, but, for the most part, it was fine. But this is a great example of what he's capable of. That's the good news. The bad news is that he left the game with a concussion and it ended with that halftime production. So that wasn't ideal. So usually we see players who suffer concussion. Usually most players have missed the following week. Hoping that's not the case here. That would suck. Do they have when was their bye? Did they already have a bye?
Their bye was when
they had their bye.
They just came off of it.
They had the bye. That's right. They just had their bye. So, this isn't ideal. So hopefully he'll be back next week. Hopefully he can be one of the, one of the minority who actually makes it back. That would be it. That would be the hope here.
Yeah, that's obviously the hope here. And I remember, the whole reason Derek Carr was, had those questions, should we play Chris Olave because Derek Carr is playing, was because they had that bye week that let him come back. You know what I'm saying? We were thinking, we're going to see Jameis Winston slinging it, this week. But that didn't happen. And it ended up being all right. I'm pissed off as a Chris Olave manager and for the rest of his managers out there because he had his third highest point total of the season through one half. It was finally, you're sitting there at halftime thinking, oh, I can't wait for Olave to get back on the field. He could have 200 and a touchdown today. He was finally going to have that breakout game that we're just waiting for, We're gritting our teeth. And then you see the sleeper notification, at least if you're me, that he's in the medical tent and then he's done for the day. You get that little out tag and then you cry a little bit and stuff, but it's fine. He didn't hang out to dry. That was really cool because sometimes you get that sometimes with receivers. He didn't hang out to dry. He had that solid production. So that was great. 7 for 114. I'll take that every day of the week if he's going to be injured. But the Saints receiving corp, they could end up looking a lot different moving forward, at least next week, like you mentioned, than it did coming into this one. Olave had that concussion, but Rashid Shaheed also left the game with a thigh injury. There's not a whole lot of info on that yet, but he didn't come back. So if one or both of them are out next week, we could be looking at another brand new target distribution in week 13, which is something that we've seen a lot with the Saints offense.
Yeah, it does. It does. And so by the way, keep an eye on Juwan Johnson. If you need a tight end, he ran a route on 85% of Derek Carr's dropbacks. He had 7 targets in this game. So Michael Thomas out, Rashid Shaheed banged up. Even if Chris Olave is back next week, Juwan Johnson, can benefit from this situation. He hasn't seen 80% route participation since week 1 when he had a 16% target share. So now today, 85% route participation, 18% target share. Okay, so I'm going to keep an eye on there. All right.
Yeah.
Look at Bijan Robinson go, man. 22 total opportunities, a touchdown through the air and on the ground. This is the Bijan we want to see. Algier only had 10 opportunities in this game. Over 100 yards from scrimmage in 2 straight games for Bijan. But I have a question for you, Zach. Why does Cordell Patterson need 8 carries in this game? Bijan Robinson only had 39% of his team's rushing attempts today. Less than 50% of the running back carries. Okay, the production was there because Bijan is that dude, right? He can make do with not a whole lot of work. But this isn't necessarily a huge step in the right direction when it comes to utilization, right? If you have Bijan, don't mind me, okay? I this might be too soon. Just enjoyed this fantasy performance, but I have to talk about the usage, right? Now, I will say, if he's getting 16 carries and 6 targets, that is very solid, low end RB1 utilization, and we'll take it every day, right? It's very similar to the type of usage we were very okay with when it came to Jahmyr Gibbs. But there are 3 running backs here in Atlanta getting touches compared to 2 in Detroit. So it's a little bit of a different situation.
It's dumb. Now, I will say this. Like, I don't hate Cordero Patterson. I think he's a very good football player. You know, he's still running hard, and he's pretty darn old. I think they say it's his 11th year in the league. So he's running hard. I'll give him that. You know, I don't think he should be off the field. But 8 carries, come on. Like, this is just perfect Arthur Smith right here. It's still not enough for Bijan. This doesn't excuse Arthur Smith for continuing the platoon of running back room that has Bijan Robinson leading it. It's easy to get tied up in the whole discussion about Cordero Patterson and Tyler Algier. They're still each getting way too many touches on the ground. That's terrible, but I think that Bijan Robinson got enough work in the ground game for me to be all right with it. My focus is on the boosted work in the receiving game. The first 4 weeks of the season, Bijan had at least 5 targets in every game, and he never scored fewer than 10 points, put up 2 20-point outings to begin the season, and he averaged 17.6 points per game as the overall RB10 in points per game through the first 4 games. Then from weeks 5 to 10, that secure floor from his work in the receiving game, it just disappeared. You know, he was RB 34 in points per game at that point, 10.1. That's what he was averaging. So my biggest takeaway here is the receiving work was back here. And this is kind of what's been floating his boat this season. You know, even if Bijan was just an early down running back, you know, he's great as a runner. He could make it happen. You know, he could be a low end RB1 with just exclusive early down work, even if he only got like 1 or 2 targets a game. But that's not the case. This is how it works in Atlanta. Other running backs get more touches. That's not the case in Atlanta with Patterson and Algier. They're apparently servicing Arthur Smith during the week. I don't know what the explanation is, but Bijan needs that work in the receiving game to be the running back that we want him to be. And I'm interested to see if that volume continues next week against the Jets. They're just going to absolutely eliminate downfield passing for Desmond Ridder. Like, how many times are they going to allow Desmond Ridder to throw past the line of scrimmage next week, do you think? This matchup is going to be really tough.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, 29% target share for Bijan in this game, which is, absolutely awesome, right?
It's legit.
Yeah. And he only ran 14 routes. So, think about that. He got six targets on 14 routes run. They didn't have to throw the ball a whole lot in this game. They didn't have to throw the ball downfield a whole lot. Drake London was able to have a decent game also on not a lot of routes run. But then when you look at like his, Bijan's target share, 11% in weeks 10 and 9, and then week 8 it was 7%, no targets in week 7. Obviously week 7, he got hurt or whatever. I think that was the game where he had the headache or whatever. But game. Before that, if you look at weeks 1 through 6, Bijan Robinson, 18% target share during that span. And that's what we're trying to get back to. Okay?
Yeah.
So if we can get back to that, I agree. He'll get it done regardless. But we just haven't seen a trend of that just yet. So I'm moving cautiously with Bijan here because the share of the work wasn't like where I wanted to be. But at least he was able to come through for a decent fantasy
This
game.
is some of the best usage that we've seen since that stretch. That's the takeaway. So it's like, please just let it happen. Can we bottle that up? Or maybe just fire Arthur Smith. I don't know. Okay, I don't want to call for his job, but I'm just going to say that. It's very infuriating as a fantasy manager.
Yeah, man. All right, so on the moving to the Bucs here. So Baker Mayfield, Mike Evans, man. Just want to touch on them real quick and just kind of appreciate Mike Evans and this rapport that these two have with each other, right? 6 catches for 70 yards and 2 touchdowns. When Mike Evans has been healthy this year, he's come through, man. He's been one of the most reliable fantasy wide receivers this season. Even in a few tough matchups, he's coming through. He was in my lineup every single week. He's going to continue to be in my lineup every single week. I don't really have much to say except that we don't give him his flowers enough on this show. We just constantly have him. I constantly have him ranked in my top 10 every single week. But it's just one of those things where 2 touchdowns in this game. It was a good matchup. He came through. He's just dependable.
Yeah. And this is and I don't know if this is my feeling about it. It's great. Mike Evans is playing very well. Dependable has not been his MO in his career. He was one of those up and down guys. Because when Tom Brady was in Tampa, Chris Godwin was his flavor of the week. That's
right.
what he liked to do. Chris Godwin was the consistent producer. But now it's Mike Evans all of a sudden. And Mike Evans has some upside. Baker Mayfield, he has eyes for Mike Evans. That's pretty much it at this point. He's first and last person he's looking for on any play. I wasn't on the Mike Evans hype train coming into the season. I did a whole spiel. I don't know anybody who listened to the episode we did on busts. I had a whole spiel on it, talking about how this 1,000-yard streak was going to come to an end. It doesn't look like it. Like, he's going to continue playing like this. There's no way that he doesn't get those 1,000 yards. But Baker Mayfield, he's played perfectly well enough to make Mike Evans not only startable, but he's a wide receiver 1. You know, he has entered set and forget territory for me. It's too bad I don't have much exposure to him at all in any of my leagues. But if you have him, like, who are you benching him for? There's no reason to even consider benching him the way that he's been playing these past few weeks. He has 9 touchdowns through 11 games, and that's like Cortland Sutton type numbers, but he has a yardage to go with it. You know what I'm saying? So he's like Cortland Sutton 2.0.
Chris Godwin, under 10 PPR fantasy points 4 weeks in a row. Not great at all. There was some concerns about Rachaad White and his knee. He played on 87% of snaps. He's fine. Moving on to the Colts, Zach Moss was a lot more involved than he was right before the bye. Jonathan Taylor had a nice game, 90 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns, but Zach Moss getting 8 carries himself. Listen, you love JT to go over 20 carries, right?
Yep.
That would be ideal. And JT wasn't targeted in the receiving game. He was only on the field for 58% of snaps. He only ran 4 more routes than Zach Moss. You know, and we talked about this, right? Like, I asked you the question. I'm like, hey, listen, if you were Shane Steichen, like, would you split this up a little bit more? And my opinion was yes. And it seems like they listened to the show, and they did exactly that, because this makes more sense from a pure football standpoint, because Moss showed he can be effective in this offense, but it's not ideal for fantasy purposes.
No. And it's funny, you took my lead for what I was going to talk about here, and you just spit it all out. You know, you have my exact notes. I said, Faraz, look what you did. Clearly, Shane Steichen heard our episode. Like, that's what it was. And now we have the second coming of the Falcons backfield. Not obviously, I'm exaggerating there. You know what I'm saying? But it was weird to look up on more than one occasion today while you're watching the games to see it's Zach Moss running the ball, you know, over Jonathan Taylor. It felt like we were back in week 5 again, you know, but my concern over Moss getting some touches is very low. I'm not worried about this. If anything, it'll help keep Taylor fresh. 8 attempts per game. That's right in the tuning range, where it's obviously just to make sure that Taylor isn't overworked. I mean, the Colts are paying Taylor top of the market money. Did you think Jim Irsay was stupid or something? Did you think that he was going to allow Jonathan Taylor to be overworked after he just paid him? No. I'm still treating Taylor as a low-end RB1 the rest of the way. There's nothing to really worry about here. It just means, I don't want to try Zach Moss as a flex option, but he had flex-type production today. If this continues, he could be a starter in a pinch for you if you need him, but it would have to be a pretty big pinch.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't go that far to, like, have to start Zach Moss, but...
Oh, yeah. Ideally, that's not your situation.
I feel like this limits that high-end RB1 range for Taylor, because the utilization that he got before the bye was one of a high-end RB1. And the utilization that he got in this game was that of a mid RB2 at best. And it's not what I want to see from Jonathan Taylor, because I know he can catch. I know he can be involved in the receiving game. You know, like... He's going to get goal line work for sure, but this isn't necessarily like the best offense in the world. Like, this was a really, really good matchup for this passing game. They were able to move the ball. I love Gardner Minshew as a start, as a QB2 start this week in Superflex leagues, and he was able to move the ball. You know, Michael Pittman had a good matchup, Josh Downs as well, but like, you know, this sucks, because like I was hoping that Jonathan Taylor could potentially move into that high in RB1 range. If this utilization continues, that won't be the case anymore, and it sucks. And you know, we love Michael. So, yeah, go ahead.
You were viewing him as a high-end RB1, or you were viewing his utilization as a high-end
I was viewing his utilization as a high-end RB1. I didn't have him ranked as one.
Right.
Because
that's what I was going to say, yeah.
If this continued, and if we had a trend of this continuing, right, then he could be in that range with, like, Travis Etienne, right, Austin Eckler, right? He could be in that range if he had the utilization to go with it. And the utilization that he had before the bye was like elite, like 90% snap rate, right? Like, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Zach Moss had like 1 touch in the game before. And
he was hardly touching the ball in those games.
And it's just like, disappointing, you know. Now,
you brought this on yourself for us.
I guess so.
I don't know what you wanted to
say. We love Michael Pittman's matchup going in. He did his thing. He was a top 12 wide receiver for me. 10 catches for 107 yards. Josh Downs also had a great matchup. Not the biggest day, though. 5 for 43. But he saw 13 targets, the same amount as Pittman. That works out to a 32% target share for either. This is turning into a start, both of these guys every week type of thing, right? Especially with that target share, right? You look at Josh Downs 5 for 43, and you're like, I don't know if I want to start him next week. But remember, utilization, right? Like chase that. Don't chase the production, right? Because if you didn't chase the production for Nico Collins last week, and you chase the target share, Nico Collins will be in your lineup this week. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, we'll be touching on him shortly, right? We'll talk about him later. But the usage that we imagine for Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua is showing up in the Colts offense for some reason, and I'm here for it. The fact that 64% of 41 targets were tied up between two players, that's just incredible for fantasy football. That eliminates like all the guesswork on our part every week for these guys. Pittman he's had double-digit targets in all but 4 games this year, so this is like normal for him. This wasn't any surprise. He had a good matchup, like you mentioned. We talked about that, and he came through. He's had top 16 finishes in each of the past 6 games. What are you doing if he isn't in your lineup is my question for you. But for Downs, this is what makes him such a great flex play. And especially like if you drafted Josh Downs, you probably weren't planning on starting him. He's probably just a dart throw. So he fits into your flex spot very, very well. Because the production, sure, it wasn't fantastic. It hasn't been there as of late. He's been injured. But look at the utilization, like you said. He looked healthy this week. He's proven that he can earn targets even working against Michael Pittman. Like, I'm putting Downs in every week from here on out as a flex if he's healthy, as long as he's getting his target share, which he's shown that he can. Like, obviously, 13, that is a very, very high target share, but he's still good for 7 or 8 targets. And that is very good utilization for a guy that you could be putting in your flex or as a wide receiver 3, and he has the talent to match it. It's not like this is just a complete volume play. That's the biggest revelation for me. You have a second viable receiver, even with Gardner Minshew at quarterback, in Josh Downs.
Yeah. Hey, Zach, guess who had Josh Downs ranked above Quentin Johnston in his rookie wide receiver ranks?
Who would that be? I mean, I think there's only one person that writes that, right?
Me. Whenever I feel so gross doing humble brags. So moving on to the Steelers real quick. I love how Ian reported that Jaylen Warren would get more touches in this game, but Naji Harris ended up out carrying him 15-13. Najee also outproduced him. Not something I saw coming. 99 yards on the ground with a touchdown. Najee played 4 more snaps than Warren. This is still a true 50-50 split, like even with the new play caller here.
Yeah, there's just something about being labeled as a second running back on the depth chart, apparently. It just makes whoever that player is, like, really hungry. You know what I mean? Like, did you see the play today where Najee Harris, he just channeled Marshawn Lynch early in the game? It's like a 20-yard carry. It featured him running with 15 of the game's 22 players on his back. Like,
it was like a 5-yard gain that turned into like a 20-yard gain.
Yeah, and the thing was, it wasn't like one of those ones where it's just like the whole crowd that everyone's pushing and then they all just fall over 10 yards later. It's like he popped out the other side of the pile and carried some DBs with him. Like, it was just hilarious. So I don't know. Maybe it's just because he's the RB2 at this point. But to your point, he looked better than Jaylen Warren in this one. But the running backs, they're very clearly the motor of this offense. We talked about that last week. The Steelers seem to be prepared to live and die by them on a weekly basis. They're going to continue to be the ones touching the ball. Not so much the passing game. It's just ridiculous. But, yeah, Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. I think they're both. You can start both of them with relative confidence, especially as like RB3 type numbers. If you're talking about if you have a flex, you could put them in there. I don't know if I want to trust them as an RB2 just because I don't know how much of a scoring upside this team has, but they've both been getting it done these past few weeks, and they're going to continue to do that. They are the focal point of the offense.
Yeah, and one big change was Pat Freiermuth's involvement, right? 9 catches for 120 yards. On 11 targets. He didn't even play a full-time role in this one. He ran 25 routes. He was targeted on 44% of those routes. Okay, that's a huge number. But listen, in order to rely on Freiermuth being an every week tight end for you, that's going to depend on those routes going up. Okay, and we can easily see that happen as he gets healthier, right? He just came off of IR a couple weeks ago, so he seemed to be pretty healthy in this game. And if he doesn't end up getting that role, he has a great schedule rest of season, so he could be in play here. So if he's available on waivers, whatever the case may be, if you have him on your bench, you didn't start him, you might have something here.
Yeah, and this was the day's out of left field performance.
Yeah,
I think that's a good way to categorize it. It just came out of nowhere, right? Like you're sitting there. I saw memes. Someone put it on Instagram. Like I said, I wish I knew the sources for all these, but it's just stuff that I see as I'm scrolling through. It's like someone told their girlfriend to keep Freiermuth on the bench, and then she texted him. He's like, "You asshole! You told me to put him on the bench. He has 27 points." Like, just freaking hilarious. Of course, this not breakout performance, but this big performance from Pat Freiermuth happens immediately after a coaching change. So we can't really be sure how we should move forward with him. Like, is this going to be something we see on a weekly basis, or is this just like one of those things that comes in an offense that doesn't throw the ball a whole lot? if you're in tight end hell and Freiermuth was contributing to that up until this week, I'd say you have no choice but to start him, moving forward. Cross your fingers next week. Hope that the Matt Canada juju has been cleansed from Freiermuth for the rest of the season. This is a guy that hadn't seen more than 4 targets in a game all season, and he was injured for the majority of the year. But I guess when Deontay Johnson is out there playing walk ball and letting the opposing team recover fumbles that he clearly has a shot at, somebody else has to pick up the slack. That could be Freiermuth. So bear in mind, though, that this is still a Kenny Pickett offense predicated on the heavy involvement of running backs. But Freiermuth looked as good as he has in his career, today. And he was earning those targets, like you mentioned, even not on a full route participation. So, there is a way that we continue to see this type of utilization. Hopefully that's the case, because there hasn't been any life in the Steelers' passing offense for weeks.
I remember when Pat Freiermuth was my guy for me coming into this year. Remember those days?
You're going to hang your head on one game? Peppered.
No, the exact opposite. I'm not hanging my head on this game because he's a lost season. It was a lost season for him. A lost season. For all the people. So, listen, if I said, hey, this is my guy, and then, a bunch of people drafted him, that was a fail. Okay? Because where we at? Week 12? You know what I'm saying? It's a long time. Okay? So... Yeah,
that's true.
It is kind of funny, like that. You're just looking back on your guys, and you're just like, oh, brutal.
Yeah. It's not a total indictment on you. I'm not gonna let you just hang yourself here.
No,
and say that this is just me. But it was an injury. I think my guy at tight end was George Kittle coming in this one, so I'm feeling all right about that one. So that was all right. But it took until 5 or 6 weeks into the season. Who knows? Could Pat Freiermuth turn things around? Man, who knows? I think there's still time.
George Kittle had a terrible game, though, this week, Zach. He had a terrible game. So, what's up?
Terrible.
What's up? What happened? I'm just kidding.
Yeah. That's just George Kittle for you. That's the nature of his production. He is the Gabe Davis of tight ends, but with just a little bit more consistency.
So, the Joe Burrow-less Bengals, okay, let's talk about that for a second. Jamar Chase, he led the Bengals in targets. Only 23% target share, though. Okay, so that's not going to get it done in subpar situations for these alpha receivers. In order for Chase to really overcome his current situation is for him to just be absolutely peppered in the receiving game. You know what I'm saying? We need, that Garrett Wilson, 35% target share to in order for him to, overcome this abomination of a passing game at this point. So... Tyler Boyd, he got one less target than him. Tanner Hudson had one less target than Jamar Chase. That's not ideal, right? I do like the matchup for Chase next week against Jacksonville. Also the matchup after that against Indy. The matchup against Minnesota the week after that, is pretty good too. So you're I have to start him, right? You can't even sit him if you want to, because he's such a good player. You saw him with the ball in his hands in this game. He's just he looks so good, but he just needs quarterback.
You mean when he was catching the passes that ricocheted off defenders twice?
Yes, exactly.
That's an indictment on the situation. That's just perfectly indicative of what he's dealing with right now with Jake Browning at quarterback. And I don't want to crap all over Jake Browning because he wasn't that bad, but this is still bad. He's trying to be a distributor, and we don't want that. He has to understand that the Bengals season is over. I don't think they're making the playoffs, so they're not going to be able to ride it with him. So now at this point, you might as well just make the fantasy managers happy. Please cave Jake Browning. Just throw it to Jamar Chase over and over and over and over. This is another one of those instances where you just have to take your lumps with the situation. Put Jamar in your lineup every week. What else are you going to do? Realistically, who else are you going to be starting over? Unless you have 3 top fantasy wide receivers on your roster. I'm just not going to be able to keep him out of my lineup. I'm going to fall back on the upcoming schedule, like you said, for Chase. And the fact that even though it's not 11 targets a game, he's still technically leading the team. He's a total floor play, though, moving forward. The ceiling is effectively gone at this point. But I think he's going to fit in your lineup as a wide receiver 3 every week. And he has upside. Who knows? Maybe we could have a Joe Burrow type performance from Jake Browning somewhere down the stretch. I don't want to rule that out completely. It's a very small sample size we've seen with Jake Browning. But the early return suggests that this is just a floor play that I don't think he's going to be a liability on your team, but any chances of him contributing, being the reason for you winning on a weekly basis, it's gone. That's just the reality of the situation.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's sad. Yeah. How many times have we had this conversation about very good receivers and the quarterbacks go down?
I know.
And it's just it's getting old at this point. We sound like broken records.
Yeah. Now, Calvin Ridley some positivity here. He had a second straight good game. That's something we've been waiting for. You love to see it. The matchup was not perfect for him, so it was good to see him overcome it. Christian Kirk ended up leading the Jags in targets in this game. He also had a good matchup, but only 4 catches. He did end up with the 89 yards receiving, tied with Ridley on the day. But I think Ridley, it's one of those things where just like, you just kind of have to like leave him in your lineup. If you don't have that many options, stop trying to like just take him out all the time because he's one of those guys where I think he's probably one of the biggest mistake-prone matchup decisions people have made. That makes no sense, but you know what I mean, right? Like,
he does not follow matchups. In the words of Mike Tomlin, he does not care.
He's one of those guys where, but people, I don't think a lot of people have been playing him to the matchups though. Like I feel like they play him if he has a good week the week before, and they don't play him when he disappoints them. And it's like if you keep playing that game, you're gonna always like outside of this week, right, where he had a 2 touchdown game last week, so people were putting him in the line. This week, great, it worked out. But just I feel like people just have to be patient with him. He is what he is. He is a boom bust wide receiver who's going to come through more often than not. That's kind of how I describe it.
So your rant is against the box score fantasy
Yes.
managers. Those are the same people that get burnt by Gabe Davis. Consistently, they get burnt.
Sure,
with Gabe
but
Davis,
with Gabe Davis, though, like that was more Gabe Davis last year. Like Gabe Davis this year, hopefully you're not starting him like at all, unless
right. Yeah.
It was this game against the Eagles. Like, this is the game where he was startable. Like, we didn't even talk about him at all, like, for the last, like, month. But, in this matchup, It made sense to talk about him. Calvin Ridley's not that guy. He's the, the flanker for the Jags. And they can use him more. Like, Zay Jones is back. That helps. But they're just using him in a way where he's able to get open. And that's great.
That's what I was going to say. We're just going to gloss over the fact that Zay Jones played. Interesting. Right? That's funny. But, yeah, the first half, Ridley had 0 points right through the first half, if I'm not mistaken. Like, it was looking really bad, but then suddenly he started getting targeted downfield. He had that octopus to cap a really nice fantasy day. I love when a receiver gets octopus. I think there were a lot of those this week. CeeDee Lamb had one on Thanksgiving. I think there was another one somewhere around down the line. I forget exactly where it was, but he has 3 touchdowns now over the past 2 games. Schedule coming up is pretty tough. He's playing the Bengals, the Browns, and the Ravens all in a row. Like, are you trusting him as a wide receiver 2 in those matchups still? Like, do you think you're not? Okay.
No,
what's his
Cincinnati?
Where does he fit in your
Cincinnati? I'm perfectly fine starting him against Cincinnati. I'm not worried about that matchup at all. Okay, right. But against Baltimore, against Cleveland, I'm straight up benching him.
All right, so keep him in your lineup for the time being, but we will let you know.
I'm straight up benching him.
We'll tell you when you're not supposed to put Calvin Ridley.
I'm straight up benching him for the Browns matchup. Straight up benching him for the, even if he does well in this game against the Bengals. Like, I'm not playing him against the Browns, and I'm not playing him against the Ravens. Also, because I also don't trust Trevor Lawrence in those matchups either, to be honest with you.
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay, let's see. CJ Stroud, another huge fantasy day, right? And what a rookie year this kid's having, man. 47 yards rushing on top, and a rushing touchdown on top of the 300 yards passing. Listen, he's throwing touchdowns too, right? Tank Dell, solid day, 5 catches for 50 yards and a touchdown. My underdog pick'ems were looking good, when Tank caught that first 58-yard pass early in the game, but then it was called back due to penalty. He could have had a much bigger day.
Bring a tear to your eye.
Dude, it was so sad. It was so sad. I would have won some legit money if that stayed, if that wasn't a penalty.
And he didn't have a completely quiet second half.
But the bigger day ended up going to Nico Collins. He led the Texans in targets for the 2nd straight week. This is why we follow target share, guys. Last week it was Tank with the big day in production, but you can't forget about Nico because he saw the 30% target share, okay? And this week, the production followed the utilization. 25% target share for Nico Collins this week. It seems like he's going to get the targets every week. Tank is going to get the targets every week. Both of these guys need to be in your lines moving forward, just like how they should have been this week. Especially if you saw our rankings, they were both, top, 15, 16 wide receivers this week. So, come on.
Yeah. No, I think we talk about the utilization. It's easy to be like, well, yeah, this was the Nico Collins game. It makes sense. But this isn't supposed to be like a gotcha for anyone who started Tank Dell. You're not like, told you, because he still found the end
Yeah.
zone. You know what I'm saying? And he could have had that bigger day, like you mentioned. So, like, the biggest takeaway for me is that just C.J. Stroud is single-handedly making both of these receivers relevant on a weekly basis. And I know there were talks, we talked about it a little bit. Dalton Schultz was coming on a little bit, the past couple of weeks, but he's been quiet. He was quiet today, obviously. I think he had one catch, that kind of thing. He wasn't even on the field.
Yeah, I'm
a lot
not
of
really
the
sure
plays,
what
but,
happened there. Like, his routes were cut in half. He only ran 2 more routes than Brevin Jordan in this game, less than 50% route participation.
Yeah.
And the last time that this happened, it happened in week 4, but he bounced back like the next week. Like, his routes went up. But, like, just something to monitor here. I'm not panicking or anything just yet, but, like, that was kind of weird to see that.
It was really weird because it was a pass-heavy game script. And we'll talk about the running backs here in a minute, but they hardly got any run. Devin Singletary was getting targeted, all that. They were getting all these targets. It was just C.J. Stroud. How many times, did you see C.J. Stroud slinging it down the field? That's not a problem at all. Like, let's just clarify. Not a problem at all that C.J. Stroud slinging it downfield. But on 3rd and 4th and short, couple times in this game, it was C.J. Stroud throwing, 30 yards downfield. Like, it was a weird game script because it was just completely pass-heavy. That's good for C.J. Stroud. But with the running backs, it really makes things interesting.
Yeah, and I mentioned coming into the week that there was probably not going to be a whole lot of carries available for the Texans. Devin Singletary and Dameon Pierce combined for 11 carries total. They basically split carries down the middle. I also mentioned that the Jaguars when they do allow fantasy points to running backs, it's through the air. And Singletary wasn't involved in the receiving game at all up until this game where he ended up catching 6 balls for 54 yards on 7 targets. But one thing that was the major difference here for these two backs in Dameon Pierce's return, Singletary was on the field for 82% of snaps in this game. He got all 3 of their goal line snaps. He ran 32 routes to Pierce's 4, 76% route participation, 100% of 3rd down snaps, 95% of 2-minute snaps. That is a huge development for Singletary if he's going to be running that many routes moving forward, right? Also, key factor, Mike Boone, who was their primary receiving back when Pierce was hurt, was a healthy scratch in this game. And his job basically was added to Singletary's responsibility. So we could see Singletary have standalone value regardless moving forward, even if Pierce ends up taking some work in the running game. Now, does the overall share get tighter moving forward between Pierce and Singletary? Maybe. Pierce was a full participant in practice all week. But I think this is an encouraging sign for Singletary for now. And the fact that they have the Broncos next week, I think Singletary is in play for that matchup.
Yeah, it plays perfectly in Singletary's hand. And I think you look at this, with Mike Boone out, this is pretty much a 2-man backfield. And I think that Devin Singletary at this point, I think they're realizing that Devin Singletary is someone that's going to have to continue to be featured. I don't know if it's going to stick around, like you mentioned, at 82% of snaps, because I do think that maybe there was a little bit of load management here with Dameon Pierce. He was out there on very minimal snaps, and I think that he was too big a part of the running back room, or at least the plan coming into the season, for them to just be like, all right, we're going to go away from Dameon Pierce at this point. Now, I don't want to rule out like a James Robinson type thing, because he was a later round running back, kind of, if you think about it. And he had that same type of James Robinson factor where it's like, he runs hard, he's really good. But if you have another guy that can do more, has a more versatile skill set, like the way that Devin Singletary is playing is going to be much more complementary to a pass-first offense and what Dameon Pierce offers. He's a bruiser. He's an early down running back. If you have a guy that can do that plus work in the passing game, I wouldn't be surprised to see Devin Singletary hold on to a majority of the work, even if it's not, like you mentioned, that 82% of snaps. If it's 65% of snaps, like I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. And Devin Singletary could be a play moving forward the rest of the way as an RB2.
Yeah, man, no, for sure. And I just want to point out one thing with the Texans. Like, I heard you say this a couple times, Zach. Like, this is actually not a pass-heavy offense. Like, there are pass-heavy producers, if that makes sense. But in terms of play calling, they're pretty balanced for the most part for the season. According to FantasyLife.com's utilization report, you can actually look at their archetypes, right? And for most games this year, through weeks 1 through 6, they were balanced. They had one extremely pass-heavy game against the Bucs, which makes sense, right? Because the Bucs have the tough front, and you want them to you want to drop back at a higher rate, which they did 73% of the time. And in this game also against the Jaguars, another game where you want to be pass first. So we definitely saw that in this game. So, but it seems like the philosophy, though, overall is somewhat balanced. And we saw how many carries Devin Singletary had over the last 2 weeks. And coming into this game, the Jaguars weren't allowing a whole lot of running back carries coming into this game, too. They're I think, the third lowest rate of, in the league, or maybe even lower than that. So just keep that in mind for any of your running backs going up against the Jaguars. Is that type of situation, and they're just really good against running backs in the run game. Okay, so there is room here for a run game, and and if Singletary is going to be targeted, also on top of that, it could have some value. But we'll see. We kind of need a little bit more data here, though, right? Like, this is a great first sign with Pierce back, but there's still a lot of variables kind of floating in the air for us at this point to make a real final call on like how this backfield is going to shape up moving forward, right? Absolutely. Now, on the other side of the ball, Travis Etienne got a little bit banged up in this game with a chest injury. Dearness Johnson ended up getting some run. He's the handcuff to have in this backfield, by the way, not Tank Bigsby, as much as it pains me to say that. You might want to pick up Johnson, if you're desperate at running back, like in a deeper league, because, in case Etienne isn't 100% next week, there could be 10 to 12 touches available for Johnson. If he was a little limited going into that game and they want to limit his touches, because we've seen Dearness Johnson like have good games. He's capable of big plays. He had a big play in the receiving game in this one, one catch for like whatever it was, 40, 50 yards. So he has that in him, right? So just in case you're in a deep league and you need somebody. But also, not only that, he makes a good bench stash just in case Etienne were to ever get hurt. This is a decent enough offense where Dearness Johnson can get some run. It reminds me of, like, we were talking on Friday morning about the Jets-Dolphins game. And I was like, yeah, I think Jeff Wilson's good for, like, 10, 11 carries, and then he ends up with like 11 carries in that game. And I looked at the box score and I was like, yeah. There he goes. I'm talking.
You're right on
it. Just
you gotta take your wins. I hear you.
So random. So like it's so random where I try to get my wins from.
No, I'm the same way.
It makes zero sense. Like it makes zero sense at all. Like who gives a shit?
This is the thing. When we were on a podcast and stuff like this, we had the sheer number of calls that we make. Like we say, this is what we could expect. We give out ranges, like you said, 10 to 11 carries, this kind of thing, that kind of thing. Just these ranges. When you actually hit on one, you look back. Like sometimes they just stick in your mind. You're like, oh, look, I was right. And it just reminds you that, hey, there's a reason I'm doing this. I'm not a complete idiot. You know what I'm saying?
Not a complete idiot is how I feel. That's how I feel. Not a complete idiot is how I would describe myself. 100%. I'm with you on that one. Rashee Rice, man, had his best game as a pro. 8 catches on 10 targets, 107 yards and a touchdown. That's his first 100-yard receiving game of his career. Very encouraging performance. Do you think this is the start of something for Rice moving forward? Obviously, he's been relatively productive for fantasy, but he's kind of like he hasn't had the huge yardage games, hasn't had the huge target games, but this is one of those games.
Yeah, finally.
Yeah.
I think if it wasn't obvious to everyone after last week's game against the Eagles, like, what really are we doing? If we didn't have Rashee Rice have this type of game, like, what would the conversation be? Like, he's clearly talented enough. I know we weren't very big on him coming into the season. We talk about the rookie kid all the time. We weren't very big on him. No. But he happens to land in Kansas City. He has Patrick Mahomes throwing to him. Hopefully this sticks. I think this could be the start of something. I don't want to say that this is Amon-Ra St. Brown type, end of season. Remember, I think it was back in 2021. Amon-Ra St. Brown wasn't a thought. And then suddenly he came out and he had these consistent production, had the target share that went along with it, and it all just came together. And it's happening at like a similar time this season. Like, could he be a playoff hero? I don't know. But he has some matchups coming up that aren't terrible, and he's clearly the best receiver in the Chiefs' offense right now, outside of Travis Kelce. And this game looked like Patrick Mahomes had a little bit more rapport with them. Maybe they worked a little bit more in practice because they were tired of having Justin Watson and Marquez Valdez-Scantling, which is handing the game to them and having it hinge on the way they produce. Regardless of this is what you want to see from Rashee Rice. You've been on Rashee Rice a little bit. You've just been waiting for him to get that target share because he has been solid, like you mentioned. I think this could be the start of something, especially since he's been part of this offense. He's been flashing where no other Chiefs receiver has been this whole season.
Yeah, I hear that, man. Jakobi Meyers, also another very encouraging performance on the other side of the ball. 6 for 79 and a touchdown. Both him and Devonta Adams had 7 targets. Not great for Devonta, but Myers might have some fantasy relevance now. He gets Minnesota and the Chargers after their bye. So some good matchups that he could potentially be a flex for.
Yeah, it's just nice to see him get back in the utilization category. Like he wasn't even a thought the past couple of weeks, and now he finally has a little bit more utilization. Granted, it's only 7 targets. He had 6 catches, but still, the touchdown was nice to see. And the other thing, it was nice to see the Raiders offense. I know they lost the game and they really slowed down, in the second half, but it was nice to see them jump out to 14-0 because like that shows against a good defense, this isn't going to be an offense like it is against like the Bengals have. Aiden O'Connell has a little bit more juice to him than a guy like Jake Browning. He's not just like this backup that you're just going to be hanging on volume with both of these guys. There's going to be a little bit of touchdown upside the way that this team plays. So I'm not discouraged at all by this. I don't think I'm more encouraged than anything. Like Jakobi Meyers could have a role down the stretch. I'm still not going to go and say that Jakobi Meyers is back, but flex consideration makes perfect sense given the matchups like you mentioned.
We've been talking about Kyren Williams all week long, right? He was a must start. He ends up having a huge fantasy day in his return. As of right now, he is the number 1 fantasy scorer of week 12, non-QB, 38 PPR fantasy points, over 200 yards from scrimmage, 2 touchdowns through the air, caught all 6 of his targets. This utilization overall and the usage in the red zone, like all year, is going to keep Kyren Williams propped up as an RB1 rest of the season.
Yeah. Did we think that anything different was going to be the case today?
Apparently, a lot of people did, though. Because
you and I saw it.
Yeah, dude. Like, I'm getting like DMs like, "Oh, he was on my bench." Like, where were you this week? Where were you?
This isn't like maybe they also had Devon Chain, and they've been down that road before where a player comes back from IR and then they just tweak their knee and then they're out and they have 1 point in your game log. Maybe it was just PTSD that kept them from doing that. But Devon Chain, the thing about him was he wasn't one of those guys where it's like, oh, the utilization and the production was there. It's like this was a guy that was just production, super efficient, touchdowns, blah, blah, blah. Good offense. The Rams are a solid offense, but the thing that stood out, and this has been the theme of the episode, utilization. Like Kyren Williams was the clear RB1. There wasn't any question at all about who the lead running back in this RB room was. He comes back, Kyren Williams, and dominates. He only had 22 opportunities. Like imagine if this were a more competitive game. Like they pulled him at the end of the game. Like of course that makes sense, but they pulled him and he didn't play a lot of the rest of the game. He could have had an even bigger day. Like this is fantastic for anybody who had Kyren Williams, and it just sucks that we couldn't have seen this all season. But he is obviously an RB1 moving forward the rest of the way. High end, like I think he's a high end RB1 the way that he's being used.
Yeah, and it's like, it comes into question where it's like some people had traded him for like Austin Eckler, that sort of thing, and you're like, yeah, you love Austin Eckler the rest of the way, but the way that Austin Eckler has been looking, like just like he's been performing like in terms of fantasy, but like the way he's been looking in terms of like how he's running and that sort of thing, it's a little iffy right now.
Are you talking about, I don't know if you saw like the key word or the key comparison, people are like, he thinks he's Mike Tolbert. Like, is that where you're referencing?
I'm
here?
referencing that run on the left sideline in the last game where, like, he should have, like, just scored a touchdown, but he let, like, a linebacker, like, catch up to him and tackle him. It was just weird because...
Is he finally showing age?
I guess, man.
Like,
I don't know.
Football. It sucks. You're going to have to ask him about that, like, especially since you're in a league with him. Be like, yo, what's going on?
I can't do that. Okay, I'm fighting for my playoff life in that game. I just played against JJ Zacharyson this week, and he whooped my ass. As he should, because he's that dude. Let's talk about Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. Should we be worried, Zach?
Should we be worried? I'm not worried, but it doesn't help having Kyren Williams do this type of thing, where he's actually a factor in the receiving game on top of being, heavily used in the run game. And the Rams ran the ball a lot in this game. It was a positive game script, so I don't want to go too ahead of myself and be like, oh, well, that's the end for Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. We don't have to worry about them. But it is definitely a problem when you look at the production of these receivers. Like Cooper Kupp had 4 points, Puka Nacua had 6 points. Nacua had 8 targets. That's fine. But just the way that this game was going, like, it was supposed to be a matchup they blew up in. Like, we knew Kyren Williams had a good match. It was good matchups all around. Kyren Williams, Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, they all had good matchups. So this kind of thing will happen. But Matthew Stafford's come back. And over the past couple of weeks, they just haven't produced the way that we kind of expected them to, given what we had seen from Stafford and these two receivers earlier in the season. Like, we knew the type of upside they have. and it's not showing still the rest of the way. I'm not going to panic because this was a complete blowout, but I am going to say, like, I think we can kiss the days of thinking that both of these guys are going to be like strong plays week in and week out, and they're not going to hurt each other. I think those days are gone.
Yeah, if this was a more competitive game and they really needed to throw the ball and make plays downfield, like I would be more concerned. But I will say that this week has me, a little bit down on these guys. I have to move them down the rankings a little bit. This is only 2 full games with Stafford now where Kupp couldn't get it done, right? Only 2 games. Okay, so let's keep that in mind. Like, we don't have a huge sample size with Stafford and Kupp playing a full game each and then not coming through. So I don't want to overdo it here, but yeah, like these two will likely take away from each other, and we won't see that funnel, right? That target funnel to either Kupp or Puka, right? Like Puka did see Puka saw a 24% target share in this game, led the team, and Kupp also wasn't 100% in this one. Now, the concerns for me, for Kupp is that like he's not the epitome of health, right? Over the last 2 seasons, right? He's getting older. Is that a factor? It could be. And, I will likely have both of these Rams wide receivers as like, wide receiver 2s next week. Maybe low end wide receiver 2s, especially against the Browns. Tough matchup. So,
yeah.
Like, I'm not going to be going out of my way to bench either of them, even in the very tough matchup next week. If I have other options, good options, fine. But I'm not going to be digging too deep to replace them.
Right. Yeah, I wouldn't be either. And you look at the way that the Browns games have gone these past couple of weeks, they're not high scoring. Spoiler alert. They don't go very high scoring in these games, the way that the defense plays. And then you also don't have the Browns offense is not that good. So I'm definitely tempering expectations for them. I wouldn't even call them wide receiver 2s. I don't want to say they're not wide receiver 2s, but I think low end wide receiver 2 fits the bill more for these guys next week, especially in a tough matchup. Then it would be like saying solid wide receiver 2.
Yeah.
Just because we said that, they'll come through next week.
But we'll see where we end up ranking them because there are several teams on bye. In week 14 is one of the biggest bye weeks, so we'll see what ends up happening there. Marquise Brown finally had a good game, man. 6 catches for 88 yards on a team leading 12 targets, 27% target share. Didn't get a touchdown, but finally, I think this is a little bit of a sigh of relief here. It's encouraging. We really need to see something in this game. Like, otherwise, I'd be pretty worried, to be honest. Like, but Hollywood, he has a very solid rest of season schedule. He does have the bye in week 14, so that sucks. But I think he's back in the low-end wide receiver 2 conversation for now, and then he has the upside to potentially move up even further.
Yeah, I think that's the only way to look at it. We were just waiting, like I said, like for me, it was like exhale. Finally, he's looking like Marquise Brown in terms of the usage, at least. This game was firmly out of hand. It wasn't competitive, so it was going to be a volume-based game anyway. But Marquise Brown did enough for me to say, okay, we can move him back up into the ranks. I feel like he's going to be a low-end wide receiver 2 also. Like, if you have to look at the way we just talked about Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua, where would you put them relative to Marquise Brown? Where would you put Marquise Brown relative to them, I guess I would say? I'd probably put them in the same bucket. Yeah. That's just me.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think it would be very far off. Like you said, we didn't get into the rankings. We're not even starting to think about rankings yet, on Sunday night. But I think just quick, off the top of my head, they're probably going to be pretty close to each other.
Yeah. I mean, luckily we won't have to do that this week because Marquise Brown will be on, well, no, he's on bye week 14 actually. So I might have Marquise, like who are the Cardinals going up against
the Steelers.
This week? The Steelers. So I might have Marquise Brown ranked above both these guys this week.
There's a chance.
Yeah, there's a chance. We'll see.
I'll see how it goes. Like,
we'll see how that goes. It's gonna be close.
Okay, we'll also talk about this. Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. This is a tough question. Who are you trusting more at this point?
Well, Puka's been getting a higher target share, right? And also he's not as unhealthy. Oh, unhealthy is a weird word. He's healthier than Cooper Kupp right now. Right? So I think I have to lean Puka at this point. I didn't realize that Cooper Kupp was as because a couple times he went down this game and he was slow to get back up and that sort of thing. Like what kind of ankle sprain did you have, dude? You know what I'm saying? I'm just thinking
it's been ankle sprains for him. This season. That's just been holding him out, and it was last season.
And
too.
this was the same ankle, by the way, that he had the high ankle sprain on. So maybe there's a little bit of lingering effects from that potentially.
Yeah. We're not doctors here, but
as you can tell,
it's worth noting.
As you can tell, it is worth noting.
It might be something lingering.
It is worth noting that Trey McBride, he got his 9 targets too. But Greg Dortch, another high target game, 9 targets this week. He got the touchdown too. Had 8 targets last week. So if Michael Wilson's out again, I think Dortch is in the flex conversation against Pittsburgh in Week 13. Okay.
I think so. And the funny thing for me in this game, did you see at the end of the game? I don't know if you saw the post, but he did a too little celebration after he scored
No, I
the
didn't
touchdown.
see that.
And it's like, Greg Dortch, of all people, you're doing that. Like, imagine being the defender that gave that one
man.
up. That was hilarious.
it.
I know they were way down, but like that just made me laugh. So like, I'm not gonna hold that one against Greg Dortch. That's great. That was just
Did
fantastic.
you see the C.J. Stroud? What was it, like the baby boy celebration?
I saw it, but like, it was funny. Like I saw it, but like it was like, I forget. It was like a clip of it after the fact. I didn't see it live, so it didn't have like the same effect.
Yeah,
You know
no,
what I'm saying?
I didn't see it.
It
I
was
didn't
just
see it
like,
live either. I saw it after the fact. And I even get the reference until I saw it. You know, until people started talking about it. I'm like, oh, love it.
Yeah,
Love it.
yeah.
Such a
Same
such a
boat
deep reference
for me.
there.
That's what it was.
Maybe one of his favorite movies. It was a great movie. So you know, it's one of those things where
Yeah.
it's cool to see. It's cool to see the celebration. But most people are probably like, what the heck is going on here? Like, he just knocked out.
Yeah,
He just knocked out his lineman.
It was a mess.
That's going to do it for this episode, guys. I'll be back on Tuesday with the waiver wire episode, early morning on Tuesday. So make sure to check that out. And Zach will be back a little bit later this week for some more episodes. We appreciate you guys. Thanks a lot for listening. Hope you guys had a good fantasy day. And hopefully, you know, all you need is somebody to get just a couple points on Monday Night Football for you to get the victory. Take it easy, guys. See you later. Are there any Monday night games this week? Who's playing Monday night?
We were just about to say bye-bye. No, tomorrow it's the Bears and the Vikings.
That's right. The Bears and Vikings.
So, it's actually relatively consequential.
Yeah. No Deontay Foreman in that game. So we'll see if Khalil Herbert ends up getting the entire backfield to himself. Anyway, I was going to say bye. So I'm going to do that now. Take it easy, guys. See you later. Bye.